Alright, hey guys, and welcome to my very first of what I hope to be many in the years to come, top 5 shmups of 2012. You guys will know that I'm pretty into shooters, especially this year in 2012. I really got back into them. I was playing them like non-stop. That was a bulk of my game collection that I picked up this year. So I thought it would be very fitting to do a video of my top 5 favorites that came out in 2012. Now granted, they were not a huge multitude of them, but it's thanks to publishers like Rising Star Games and, Cave that keep on giving us iOS releases of some of their older titles, or publishing some games that used to be only in Japan and they bring them over to North America and Europe as well. So what do you say we get started with number 5? Now to kick it off, it's going to be Dodonpachi Maximum. This is an exclusive shooter by Cave, their very first built from the ground up shooter for the iOS device, and it is a really great game. I would say this is a perfect introductory shooter for those of you that are interested in getting into the bullet hell style shmups, because you start off, you can play on easy mode, and it's actually very easy to get into. The bullets are fairly slow. Believe it or not, despite how it might look very chaotic on screen here, it is very easy to dodge the bullets, much more so than you would think if you've never played a bullet hell shooter before. Has a really interesting mechanic where, depending on the color of the enemies, certain ones you can pass over and others you can't pass over, because if you hit into them, you will explode. Unfortunately, the only downside I find with this game is that it lacks certain personality of many of other Cave shooters, because they sort of take on this digital, sort of retro look where everything has this pixelated look to it. So all the enemies and everything are, for the most part, just flat out colors with a little bit of detail to them. So if you can look past the sort of weird aesthetic, which in a way does make it unique at the same time, because I can't think of another shooter that looks like this, definitely give Dodonpachi Maximum a look. And it's a shooter that you can play with a single finger. All the, the powered up shot and moving around is all handled with just one touch of the touchscreen, and it's a great game. Coming in at number 4 is going to be a physical release, and that is from Rising Star, or courtesy of Rising Star Games, and it is a Cave bullet hell shooter that just came out, and that is Akai Katana. Now, I would say that this is not my favorite Cave shooter out of the ones that I have played, but it is a lot of fun to play, especially on Slash mode. Slash mode has you building up so many different meters. It was a bit overwhelming at first, I have to admit, and that's my first word of warning. Akai Katana is not for people that are new to shooters, especially bullet hell shooters. It can be very overwhelming, not even just with how many bullets are on screen, but how many game mechanics there are. But once you figure it out in terms of balancing, powering up your, I guess you can call it I forget what they call it in the game, but there's a charge meter and there's a metal meter, and depending upon which kind of shot you use, it builds up these orbs around your character, which you then shoot out, and they turn into katanas. And then you shoot the katanas out, and those just wreak havoc on screen, and you get a ton of score. And that is Slash mode. That is my personal favorite gameplay mode to play. There is the original mode, which has sort of a barrier that'll surround your character, that will deflect bullets all around you, and it's not my personal favorite mode. That might be the one to start off on to kind of get you accustomed to the game. But this is the kind of game where you're going to play it for score. It's not so much on one credit clear, which is what I kind of prefer from a shooter. This game is all about score and learning how to maximize using your power-ups and your abilities to the fullest to get that really high score. But just a word of warning, like I said, this game is extremely difficult, and you will find yourself dying a lot unless you memorize the levels over and over, and when it's best to save and use your katanas and such. So definitely try out Akai Katana. This is released on the Xbox 360, courtesy of Rising Star Games. Okay, and coming in at number 3 is another retail release, and this is also courtesy of Rising Star Games, and that is Under Defeat HD. This is a new HDified port of a Dreamcast shooter that was released late in the Dreamcast lifecycle in Japan. It never made its way over to North America, but it did see the HD release on the PlayStation 3 in Japan, but that never made it over to the US either. So thank you to Rising Star Games. A couple years later, we got the North American version, and I have to say this game is a lot of fun. It has a very realistic military feel to it that really makes it feel different from other shooters, and a beautiful widescreen display. Most people that are used to playing shooters on consoles these days they're probably used to sort of having that bordered off mode to kind of fit into the regular arcade aspect ratio, where Under Defeat HD takes advantage of full widescreen if you're playing in the new gameplay mode instead of regular arcade mode, and it looks absolutely beautiful. Now, you might be surprised when you first start playing this because it's not like your typical shooter. It actually has an old school feel to it, where in most new shooters these days, it's all about getting the best power-up you can, powering up your spread shot and getting all these different abilities and just wrecking havoc on screen. Under Defeat HD takes a more simple approach in that you play as a helicopter that you don't power up a shot ever. The firepower that you start with at the beginning of the game is what you end up with at the very end of the game. There's no powering up your spread shot or getting huge lasers. It's all about your options, and the options are your little ability ships that you can summon out, essentially. And how that works is a meter will charge up when you're not shooting. So when you stop firing for a few seconds, you'll be able to let loose on, say, a little Vulcan robot option that will fire a cannon or a machine gun. And then there's one that fires sort of like a tank, like a cannon. And then there's one that can also fire a rocket. And the reason why you want to use these option shots is because the kills that your options get will give you much higher score boosts. And it's definitely a lot of fun once you sort of learn how to play. And learn how to play you will have to do, because this game has another really unique mechanic where it's not like you're firing straight in a line the entire time. You actually can angle your shot. So let's say you play in inverted mode and you move to the left. Your ship will angle to the right, and you can lock your shot in that way, so you can keep firing like this or like this at angles if you hold down the shot button. While you're not holding down the shoot button, it sort of swivels back and forth depending upon which direction you're facing, so you can do inverted and uninverted. And if that's a little bit too cumbersome for you, you can also turn on the dual stick mode, so you can use both joysticks on the PlayStation 3 controller. The right joystick will control the pivot of your helicopter, and the left joystick will move around. This game, however, is extremely challenging, and it's one of the few shooting games that actually made me put it from normal to easy mode to sort of get a grasp of the game, because it is very difficult. There's no way to increase your score to get new ships, or I should say one-ups, so you're kind of stuck with what you have from the beginning, and it's all about memorizing the bullet patterns and what enemies are coming up next and when best to use your option shots and all that stuff. But man, does this game look amazing. It has a techno rock, sort of synth rock soundtrack that just fits in with the game beautifully. The visuals are just flat out gorgeous. Like I said, it sort of has a realistic look to it, so it's not your typical like high fantasy steampunk look. Some of the bosses that are pretty large and towering go a little bit outside of the bounds of what you'd realistically find in real life, but the game is very impressive to look at, awesome to hear. The gameplay is simple, but simple in a good way. I highly recommend Under Defeat HD. It's available on the PlayStation 3 only in North America, but in other regions you can also find it on the Xbox 360. Alright, and coming in at number 2 is going to be another digital release, and this one is one that I downloaded actually not too long ago, and it's a port of a PSP game from 2009 that never made its way outside of Japan, and that game is Dariusburst Second Prologue on the iOS. And man, this game is flat out unbelievable. It took me by surprise. I wouldn't call myself the biggest fanatic of the Darius series, but I definitely appreciate its sort of robotic, aquatic theme that it always has going on, and the multiple branching paths that you can choose as well. But what really makes Dariusburst so awesome is just the presentation and the towering bosses that you get to fight at times. I mean, some of these bosses are really unbelievable in their designs, and a lot of the bosses also have multiple sort of tiers to them, or stages, especially the last bosses that you get to in the stages. I mean, they are just so much fun to take on. The game's challenging. You can play it on 3 different difficulty settings, and it has the burst meter, which you can let go by pressing the burst button in the bottom right hand corner, and it'll sort of let go with this big huge charge shot that builds up your multiplier really, really big, up to times 16, and you can keep that going by killing enemies. So it's really this, it has this great sense of score multiplier mechanic and great level designs. It looks amazing because it is a port of a PSP game. It's not your typical iOS shooter that's out there. The game also has a very unique soundtrack. A lot of the songs sort of take on this weird, almost like religious, techno-y, just strange. Some of the tracks on this game are just completely strange, but it really fits. whereas other tracks are your typical shoot 'em up style fare. But the game does an excellent job in replayability as well, because you can choose multiple branching paths when you go to select your levels. And the paths will lead you to one of many of the different optional bosses at the end of the game. So you're going to get to pick and choose your way through to what path you want to take through Dariusburst. But what can I say? This game has everything going for it, and it's a highly recommended game for anybody that has a PSP. However, it's pretty expensive to import, so I would say if you have an iOS device, definitely go with Dariusburst, second Prologue on the iOS. Okay, so my number one favorite shmup of 2012 is a game called Bug Princess 2, and it's also known as, in Japan, as Mushihimesama Futari. And this is the sequel to Mushihimesama or Bug Princess 1. And it's known as Bug Princess on the iOS devices, and I have to say, this game, it blew away my expectations of what was possible for an iOS shooter. I fell in love with the very first Bug Princess, so this year I was very excited to get my hands on Bug Princess 2. I am a huge fan of shooters on the iOS, especially cave shooters. The controls, oh man, they just work so perfectly. And I know there's probably a lot of shooter fans out there that would probably argue against using touch controls if you have the option of using a regular controller or an arcade stick, but I, for one, absolutely love touch-based controls, especially with cave games. They seem to get the precision just right. It feels really good. It makes dodging and weaving in between bullets just pinpoint accurate. And Mushihimesama Futari just does an excellent job. The game has amazing graphics. I mean, screen-filling bosses with excellent animation and detail to them. The stages are really interesting and varied, all different types of enemies. The bullet patterns are just ridiculous. This game might look a bit crazy because I'm showing you one of the hardest difficulties, but you can knock it down to an easier difficulty, and it's a perfect entry-level shoot 'em up for those of you that are interested in getting into them if you play it on the lower difficulty settings and sort of gradually work your way up. The game also has an unbelievable soundtrack, and the best part is it's kept very simple. You know, a very simple score multiplier by just shooting enemies and building up your multiplier. It'll build up your score. You have a bomb, you have a concentrated shot, and then you have a widespread shot that will bring in all the score multipliers to you. It's very satisfying, it's simple, it's chaotic, it looks amazing. It's the definition of, you know, a definitive bullet hell shooter, and it's my favorite shooter of 2012. Well, anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, definitely leave me a comment below. Let me know what your favorite shooter was of 2012. I might have missed one or two, I'm not quite sure. I know there were some that I left off my list, but for the most part, I think this was a great representation of what shooter fans had to choose from in 2012. As always, guys, thanks for watching.